Yeah. So in this particular slide, if you look at like we will have mentioned like we will be having a daily Scrum meeting. So here in the Scrum life cycle, you can see for every day we will be having a daily status call, or it is like a daily stand-up meeting. So which will be like
Okay.
around 10 to 15 minutes, where all the team members will be need to attend that particular daily stand-up call. And what they need to do is here, the Scrum Master. Now the Scrum Master will come into the picture here. So he will conduct these daily stand-ups, and he will ask the three questions to each of the team members. Like he will be asking like what you have accomplished since the last meeting. So we will, as we have the said that the daily stand-up what we had in the last yesterday. So there we said like we are working on so and so part requirement. So now in today's stand-up, we will be asking, I mean, the Scrum Master is asking like what you have done from yesterday to today. I mean, we need to update the status of the daily work that has been done. And then he will be asking the another question is like, do you have any obstacles in the way of meeting your goal? So when we, as we mentioned, like we are working on this particular requirement, so he will be asking like, do you find any blockers in implementing or in developing that particular requirement? And then what will be your accomplished before the next meeting, in the sense like in by tomorrow what you are going to deliver, or what we are going to achieve. Like we can say like by tomorrow I'm going to complete the functionality of this particular requirement, or by tomorrow I will complete the unit testing of this particular requirement.
Okay.
And here we will have the sprint 1 month. It is given as like a 4 week sprint. And once the 4 week sprint is defined, then we will have the new functionality that is demonstrated at the end of each sprint.
Okay.
And these are the different roles in the Scrum framework, what we are having, like product owner, Scrum Master, and team. And here the different ceremonies is nothing but what we call as a different meetings that this particular Scrum is going to have is the sprint planning, sprint review, sprint retrospective, and daily Scrum meeting. So we just had a look discussed about the daily Scrum meeting, and we have the sprint planning. And we'll after the sprint planning is done. So sprint planning is nothing but here we have the list of features that need to be delivered for this particular 1 month, or it's a 2 week sprint, whatever the sprint duration that is defined here. So in this particular backlog, product backlog, the list of requirements what we have. So we will split that particular requirement into multiple features, and these particular features we will be considering that need to be delivered in the particular sprint which is having. And now this sprint backlog is having all the requirements or all the features that need to be delivered on the particular sprint that is defined. That is the sprint 2 week sprint. So in the 2 week sprint, what are the set of requirements that need to be delivered will be having in the sprint backlog. Whereas in the product backlog, we will be having the list of all the features required by the customer. We can say it as like these are the set of requirements for the entire product, where this is
Okay.
nothing but the requirements of the current sprint.
Okay.
And once we have the sprint planning done, then we will have the sprint review, and we will have the sprint retrospective, and then the daily Scrum meeting is the one which happens until and unless if on every day, like till the sprint start date to sprint end date.
Okay.
And what happens in the sprint planning, and what we are going to do in the sprint review, and what will be the things that need to be discussed in the sprint retrospective, these three ceremonies we will discuss in detail when we move to the roles and responsibilities of the Scrum Master.
Okay.
Because Scrum Master is the person who will be conducting or initiating all these meetings or conducting all these ceremonies. So Scrum Master is the person who is going to schedule the sprint planning, and the Scrum Master is the person who is going to schedule the sprint review, and he is the person who is going to work on the sprint retrospective.
Okay.
And coming to the artifacts here in the Scrum, what we are having is like product backlog we just discussed. and the sprint backlog, and then the we will having the burn down chart. This is nothing but burn down chart is nothing but the work done or the amount of work that is delivered. And when we have log, say for example, uh, today you are working for the particular requirement, you have been given a story points of two story points is nothing but each story point will be given 8 hours, that nothing but one working day. So when I say like 2 points, it is 16 hours. So when I log hours for today, I'll mention like I have worked only 4 hours out of eight. So this burn down chart will gives you the results of like how much work that has been done on the particular requirement or on the particular user story by the particular member. It's nothing but he is burning the hours for the requirement that or for the user story that has been assigned to him. Again, we will look into this burn down chart, product backlog, sprint backlog in real-time scenarios when we move to the Zero. So we will have the Zero which supports the Scrum frame process. So in Jira, we will see like how the product backlog is having and how the sprint backlog is going to work, and then how we are going to generate the burn down chart. And we are also having multiple reports in Agile. We will discuss in detail like the major reports that need to be generated by the Scrum Master over there.
Okay.
And as we mentioned here, the different roles involved in the Scrum is the product owner. So we know that product owners, he defines the features of the product and he will decide on the release date and content here. And he will be the responsible for the profitability of the product, which is nothing but the rate of interest. So he is the person who will prioritize the features according to the market value, and he is the person who is going to adjust the features on priority for every iteration as needed. And finally, he is the person who is going to accept all reject the work that has been the work results is nothing but the work delivered or the piece of work delivered in the particular sprint.
Yeah.
Now you can see the roles and responsibilities of Scrum Master. So he represents the management to the project and he is responsible for enacting Scrum values and practices. And he is the person who is going to remove the blockers or any impediments related to the development of the project. And he is the person who is going to ensure that the team is fully functional and productive, and he is the person who is going to cooperate across all roles and functions, and he is the person who is going to work as a shield, like he is the person who is going to protect the team from external interferences like so he will not allow the team to involve in any other activities. So if a person is worked in the assigned to this particular sprint or uh, then he will not be moved to any of the project or he will not be assigned any of the work because he has been allocated the hours to deliver the particular story or particular user story, or you can say it as a requirement. So the before so he will be acting as a shield, to protect his team.
Okay.
And then the next role in the Scrum is we discussed about the product owner and the Scrum Master, and then we will be having the Scrum team. So usually the size of the team will be minimum of five and the maximum of 10 people. And as we mentioned, like the Scrum team is a cross-functional where we have the combination of both all the developers, QA, and then the UI designers, and sometimes even the what we can say it like a admin department. So for that, I mean they are not required in all the days in the sprint, but whenever we have a particular release, then we need to be intimated to the admin team or the operations team. And that's why we have mentioned like system admin is maybe an exception one. And the teams are self-organized, and you can see self-organized in the sense like teams should be organized in such a way like if a particular person is working on a user story with high functionality, and then any other work or any other dependencies that particular user story is having, that need to be addressed by the other team member, that he need to work one each of the team members need to work closely, and whatever the dependencies that the particular user story taken by the user is having, so the other team member should implement or should cover them.
Okay.
So you will also get in detail about like how we can say it as like a self-organized one when we move to the in Jira, when we see the product backlog and the sprint backlog items. So these are the ceremonies what we have discussed like in the sprint planning meeting and the sprint review and the daily scrum, and we will also be having the sprint retrospective. So when we say like the sprint planning meeting, right?
Mm.
So here in the sprint planning meetings, what are the things that we need to have here? The first thing is in order to prioritize the requirements or the features that need to be delivered in the sprint, first thing is we need to have the product backlog. And then we need to have the particular team who is going to work on the current sprint. That is when we are going to select, when are going to define, or when we're going to plan a particular sprint, so we need to have the resources who are capable to deliver the requirements or to deliver the features that are considered in the particular sprint, and the business conditions and the technology's current product. So business conditions are nothing but whatever the business rules that are having to this particular requirements and that need to be addressed before the sprint planning. So we will consider the business conditions as well. And then the technology, like before implementing the sprint itself, we will know like on what technology or on what platform we are developing this one. That is whether it is a Java, .NET or any other technology. And we will be having the current product. Current product is nothing but whatever the things that are developed till now. Say, for example, if we are doing the sprint planning for the iteration two, so we are having the current product is nothing but here the sprint one or the iteration one items.
Okay.
And in the sprint planning, who are all involved is the PO will be, the product owner will be involved, the Scrum team will be involved, and the customers will be involved. And again, the management people. The management people here is nothing but uh, where we can call it like as a project managers will be involved here. And once we have the sprint planning meeting, so what are the deliverables or the outcome of the sprint planning is we will be having the sprint goal. Sprint goal is nothing but by implementing this 2 week or 4 week sprint, what are the items that I'm going to release, or what is the objective of implementing this particular sprint. Say, for example, if I'm working on the requirements or of the features related to the login screen. Though, so this current sprint is having all the features related to the login screen. So by the end of the sprint planning, by the end of the sprint, what you are going to see here in the sprint goal is I can able to view the login screen. That is all the requirements or all the features related to the login screen should be implemented or should be delivered in this particular sprint. And then here we will be having the sprint backlog. Sprint backlog is nothing but we in the from the product backlog we will derive the sprint backlog. Like so, in the sprint backlog, whatever the stories that we have identified that need to be considered in the particular sprint, so those will be released accordingly as per the sprint backlog or not.
Okay.
If we look at this particular site, so here if you see the sprint backlog here, so in after completing the sprint, so are we delivering all the features that has been defined in this current sprint, which is nothing but the sprint backlog. Don't get confused on these terminologies of the product backlog, sprint backlog, and sprint planning. So we will get all the clear understanding just when we look at the real-time implementation. When we say like how we have prioritized the requirements in the product backlog and how the sprint backlog is defined, and then how we are going to have the sprint planning.
Okay.
So what will be the different thing parts in the sprint planning meeting is like first we will having the product backlog, and then creating the product backlog is nothing but we need to have all the requirements of the project, and then we will determine the sprint goal. So as we discussed in an example, like we will be the sprint, the current in the current sprint, we are going to deliver the login screen of the application. Mhm. Excuse me. And we will have the participants here. So the product owner, Scrum team, and the Scrum Master. And the second part is like creating the sprint backlog. So sprint
Okay.
backlog is derived from the product backlog.
Good
So
background.
just keep this one particular rule here. Whenever you talk about the sprint backlog, you need to have the product backlog. And the
Okay.
sprint backlog is derived from the product backlog.
Okay.
And so, as we discussed, like the sprint may be a 2 week or a 4 week sprint. Most of the companies will follow 2 week, and the 4 week sprint again, it depends upon the organization or the project on the project they are working on. Say if they are unable to split the requirements into multiple features or multiple set of requirements, then we will be having only uh, 2 or 4 requirements that need to be worked on it. So for those 4 requirements we can deliver in it 2 week sprint. So we will consider those requirements which are having high functionality or which cannot be further broken down into multiple user stories or multiple requirements, set of requirements. So for those user stories which are having the story points of more than 5 or 10, so we will be considering them as a 1 month or a 4 week sprint. So
Okay.
as we already discussed, like the Scrum team will not be affected by any of the external influences here. And each sprint begins with the daily Scrum meeting. So when we say like the sprint planning is done, so tomorrow from tomorrow onwards, the sprint is going to start. So on the particular date, say for example, from tomorrow onwards, you will be having the daily Scrum meetings. That is nothing but daily stand-up calls.
Okay.
And as we mentioned, like in the daily stand-up call, you will be answered from you need to give the status of the project, like what you have done till now. And if do you faced any blockers while implementing when you are working on the particular requirement or when you're working on a particular user story, and then what you are going to deliver by tomorrow, by the next day. So this is how the daily scrum or the daily stand-up call is going to work here. So this explains here clearly, like it's a 15-minute stand-up call, and this stand-up call will not be here to discuss on the functionality of the requirements or to discuss on any of the issues that the team is having. This is only to understand the status of the each team member working into the in the particular sprint.
Okay.
So in that particular stand-up call, we will not be allowed, like if you are having any issues or any queries on the particular requirement or any blockers you are having. So you need to mention like I am having a blocker in implementing the requirement. So I need the help of so and so team or so and so resources. So
Okay.
when you mention like a blocker, so the scrum master who is the person going to conduct the daily scrum, so he will take the point and he will directly interact with you after the stand-up call saying like, hey, Anjani, you said like you have some blocker for the user story that has been assigned to you. So what is the blocker? And for to in order to continue resume the work, what is the support that you are expecting? So do you need to get the support from any of the other team members or any of the members who are already worked on this particular functionality, so that you will be addressing this to the scrum master and the scrum master will work on it to get the work done for you. Like he will be scheduling the meetings or he will be helping with you on whatever the information that is required. I mean, he is the person who is going to address the blocker that you are having.
Okay.
And these are the things which we have already discussed, like the three questions which need to be addressed in the daily stand-up call by each of the team member is like, what did you do yesterday and what are you going to do today, and any blockers or obstacles in your having. And when you are attending to the Scrum daily stand-up call, keep in mind like you are not going to give, it's not a problem solving solution and it is not a call to collect any of the information, and it is a meeting just only the team members make commitments to each other and to the Scrum Master.
Okay.
And see what happens in the sprint review meeting. So team presents what it is accomplished during the sprint. So the sprint review meeting usually happens once we have the sprint is completed. So after 2 weeks sprint, so there will be a sprint review meeting. So in the team meeting, in this particular review meeting, team will explain like what are the features or the requirements that they have worked on the particular sprint. So it's nothing but giving a demo. Sprint review meeting is nothing but giving a demo to the PO or the business users to explain like what are the features or the requirements they have worked on that particular sprint. And we have the participants here like customers will be there, PO will be there, and the project managers will be there in this sprint review meeting.
Okay.
And the product backlog, as we already discussed at a high level, like it's a list of all desired work on the project. And this list is prioritized by the product owner. And you will have all the set of requirements that are related to the all the requirements related to the project. And this product backlog is managed by the product owner itself. And before one point, key point you need to remember here is before when we say like when we have start working on the sprint, you need to have the product backlog ready. So before the sprint planning itself, you need to have the product backlog ready.
Okay.
And the sprint backlog during the sprint, so the changes team adds any so this also the sprint backlog, I think you will get a clear understanding when we work on the real-time implementation of the project. Say in the Jira framework, you can see we can see like how a subtask can be created to the user story, and you can see like how they are going to give the estimates, and also I think this part of the major sections will be covered in the Scrum role when we discussed about the Scrum Master roles and responsibilities. So you will see like in detail about how we are going to add the tasks, and then how we are going to give the estimates to the user stories. And as we discussed about the sprint burn down chart, so it gives the total sprint backlog hours remaining per day, and it gives the estimated amount of time to release, and it's gives the usually it should be a straight line. I mean, it should not be a straight line. You can see in the burn down chart when we have that product backlog and sprint backlog ready with us, then only we can see this burn down chart.
Okay. So all these Scrum meetings will be held by BA, or is there a separate person for
All
Scrum
the
meetings?
all the sprint meetings will be done by the Scrum Master.
Okay.
So if you see here, the Scrum Master is the person who is going to create schedule all the meetings here. So
Okay.
when we talk about the Agile here, the BA is nothing but a PO here.
Okay.
So if you see here the roles. Yeah. So when we have the product backlog, so who is going to uh, work on the requirements part? So who will prepare the requirements? Usually in the waterfall model, we will say it as a BA. So the work done by the PO is nothing but he is also working on the requirements part, and only the terminology will change here. Like we will be using the user stories, and we will be having like each user story can have multiple number of subtasks here, and uh, yeah, and then the requirements will be broken down into multiple subset of requirements.
Okay.
Okay, so this product backlog is handled by the PO, and when we say like BA, they will call it as a PO in the Agile.
Okay.
Mm,
So they will only handle all the requirements that have to be done.
yeah, PO is the person who is the responsible person for the entire product.
Okay. Okay.
So as we mentioned in the waterfall, like BI is the person who is responsible for all the requirements, right?
Yeah.
Any change in the requirement that who will be the responsible person? I mean, if the particular if the requirement like if any of the team member is having any clarification, so he need to whom he need to reach out. So we said like it's he need to reach out to BA to get his query clarified or to get any detailed explanation on the functionality, how it can be implemented. So
Okay.
as we mentioned like a BA, so here it is PO.
Okay.
And then one second, agile methods is done and stakeholders will okay. So what we'll do is so we need to have the so the Scrum. Let me put it into this. So as we say, like a Scrum process or methodology, what are the set of elements that we need to have here is first one, we need to have the product backlog ready. And then we need to have the sprint backlog. We will define sprint backlog. And then we'll have the sprint planning. Usually, let's take it as a 2 week sprint. Sprint planning, 2 week. I'll mention it as like a 2 week sprint. And once the sprint planning is done, then what we will be having, like we will be having the sprint, we can be able to define the sprint goal and then the sprint backlog. Okay, and then here we can say it as like a um, release. Okay, and then during this entire process, we are going to have the ceremonies like backlog refinement, Then we'll having the sprint planning meeting, and then we'll be having the sprint review meeting, and what is the other one? We will having the sprint retrospective. Sprint retrospective meeting. And once it is done, then we can able to generate the burn down chart. Here and is a burn down chart for the current sprint. So this is, I mean, in high level, like this is what we discussed till now in the Agile, like in the Agile methodology, the process that supports the Agile framework or the Agile methodology is the Scrum. And in the Scrum, we discussed about the product backlog, and we have the sprint backlog, and we have the sprint planning. And once the sprint planning is done, then what will be the deliverable of the sprint is nothing but sprint goal and sprint backlog. So once the sprint goal and after completing of this 2 week sprint, then we will be having a release. And in the particular, during this particular process, once this particular sprint is done, then we will be having the retrospectives of these three: sprint planning, sprint review meeting, and sprint retrospective.
Okay.
I will say the backlog refinement is done. Hmm. What is this backlog refinement? Here we are nothing but prioritizing the, let's simply make it as a backlog refinement. Now, based on this structure, we need to configure the project in the Jira. Like we need to create in the Jira, we need to create the product backlog and the sprint backlog, and then we need to plan for a sprint. So probably by tomorrow, I think by this weekend, I'll set up the Jira trial version in my local environment, and I'll provide access to you. So it will be a limited time of 14 days or 15 days, so that you can work on it. Basically, you can also get the access, but for every trial version, you need to log in with a different Gmail ID.
Okay.
Okay, so once we have all these information ready with us in the particular in a form of an Excel, then we will start working on the real time. We will log in into the Jira and we will create the user stories like that. So in next 2 or 3 sessions, we will be working on this backlog refinement, product backlog, and sprint planning.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So
So any
I
questions till now?